If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, travelers of lonely roads, explorers of the great outdoors, workers of creepy jobs and late night shifts. What's your scary story? I was the navigation officer for a research ship in the South Pacific. We had recently come to Papua New Guinea for some work along the coast. We had arrived in a small bay at around 10 p.m. in the dark and dropped the anchor. I went over to mark our position on the chart and noticed an annotation that said native village reported in the area. There were no fires or lights on the coast, so I didn't think anything much more of it. I turned on all the deck and underwater lights and went back into the bridge to stand my night watch as everyone else went to bed. With all the lights on, I couldn't see further than about 25 yards because of a light mist in the pitch black night. I sat in the bridge with the door open because I like the sound of the night and the feeling of the air in the tropics. I kept hearing light splashing in the water and went out to sea because often we get hundreds of fish in our underwater lights. There was nothing there. I went back inside but kept hearing faint splashing and couldn't figure out where it was coming from. Since I couldn't see into the distance, I went into the chart room and flicked on our infrared camera system, and there they all were. About 50 native outrigger canoes just sitting outside our pool of light. About 3 people to a canoe and all just sitting in and watching us. Occasionally paddling one way or the other to keep their station. I have never felt so suddenly and violently alone and small as I did on that ship in the dark. I got a deck hand up and we both just walked around the decks to show that people were awake and moving. They sat there and watched us all night. Completely invisible except for on the infrared cameras. In the morning they came in and traded with us and were very friendly and just hadn't had a ship in their bay for decades. I was driving down an old highway, not heavy usage anymore, during a snowstorm in 2011. Had a pretty close call on this particular trip. I was heading to the next town over with my girlfriend at the time, and we behind an SUV on the road. We were behind them for a good while, when they came to a stop. I maneuvered the car around to get a good look at why they stopped. There was a truck in the road, driver and passenger doors open, and 2 sets of tracks in the snow leading off to the woods. I got out of the car to make sure no one was injured or needed help, but there were no signs of car trouble. There wasn't much snow built up on the inside of the car, so the doors hadn't been left open for long. It was snowing pretty heavy. I started to follow the set of tracks into the woods to check, but stopped. Before I could do much of anything else, the driver of the SUV called me over and let me know that the truck had been reported as stolen. They said highway patrol was on their way, so I went about my business. A day or so later I found out the owner of the truck was a man who lived nearby that had been missing for over a week. The police went into the woods to look for him, and found his freshly deceased body in a ditch with a single gunshot to the back of the head. Whoever took him beforehand must have marched him out there, executed him, and just wandered off into the woods. I'm still very glad I didn't follow those tracks. I didn't hear the shot, so it must have been right before we all arrived at the truck. I don't even want to think what would have happened to me if I'd persisted. Once my friend and I were hiking on an overnight trip to the summit of this peak. In order to get from the campgrounds to the peak you had to, unless you wanted to cross a deep river, walk across the mountain ridges and then descend into a valley in order to climb out of the valley onto another set of mountain ridges. It is impossible to reach the mountain in one day, so you have to find a place to camp for the night. In this area of Alaska, everywhere is tundra and mountains except for the valley between the 2 ridges. There is cover from the wind there, so we decided to set up camp there. It is important to note that the campground has the only road leading to civilization for miles. To come from any direction other than the one we came from would mean the nearest town is more than 100 miles away. Also important side note, when we arrived we were the only people at the campground. It is late at night and we are trying to fall asleep when we hear footsteps approaching, slow human footsteps and a raspy breathing. It was human for sure, not animal. We were armed with a bolt-action rifle for protection from bears, so we asked who was out and there was no reply. We then heard them knock over our clothes drying rack. I was scared shitless and warned the person outside that we were armed. The footsteps suddenly picked up as the person ran past our tent opposite of the direction of the campgrounds. There was no shacking of a pack as they ran, which I found odd. It was a sleepless night, and when the sun shone on the valley we exited our tent to find our clothes drying rack in tatters, and there were small boot prints in the ground leading towards and away from our tent. We made it to the mountain and hightailed it back to the campground as fast as we could. I don't know who that was, but I didn't go camping for a while after that. Once I was working in a restaurant and got done at around 12ish. I always rode my bicycle to and from work. It was about 15 minutes along a bike trail next to the train tracks. This trail was constantly straight but had quite a few exits here and there. It also only had a few small parts of it lit up by street lights, so without my front bicycle light I would be totally blind for the most part. So this one night I leave OMW home after the shift and I notice a guy is biking behind me, which isn't too weird at that time of night in a busy, but very safe, city. It was weird that he had no lights and was still there after the first main exits, which after that led to a small town, but I thought it might just be a coincidence. I felt a bit creeped out and thought I might just be tired and the dark of the night is getting to me. So I decided to bike a bit slower and let this person pass. There was definitely enough room on this trail. The person started drifting along at the same speed as me and made no attempt to pass or even come closer. This is about when I'm a few minutes away from home and decide to take some random lefts and rights instead of going straight home, just in case this person was following me and wouldn't find out where I live. I bike around going in random twists and turns in a suburban neighborhood and he's still behind me. What I then did is I noticed I was heading straight for a long small dark path only for bicycles. I decided to turn into one of the houses and hide in the dark shadows from their garage. I heard this person pass the house and brake quickly in that small path. At this moment my blood is boiling. Now I hop on my bike and when I passed the edge of that street I stopped and stared that person in the eyes. Well, that's what I hope he thought, cause I actually couldn't see anything of his face. I biked so fast then did another few extra loops here and there until I felt safe and alone again to go home. Never had anything like it afterwards and still don't know who or why it could have been. I'm happy not knowing. Not what I saw but what I heard. I was on a solo motorcycle trip across the great USA. From New York, to southern Florida, then straight across to Los Angeles. I crashed at 80 miles per hour, ran from a shooting in New Orleans, and a guy hyped up on crystal meth tried to fight me, but none beats the chill I felt deep in the woods of Louisiana. I camped at national parks 85% of the trip and loved meeting the people there. No real scary animal encounters, all was good. This particular day was Thanksgiving 2015. I came out of the local market with my dinner for the night and a little camp spot in mind. A father and his son saw me and my motorcycle, so they stopped by to chat. All was well, until he asked me where I was planning on staying that night. I told him. His face went white. He begged me not to go. I asked why. He said there's a group that practices dark arts in the woods around there, particularly during Thanksgiving. He said people have been known to go missing. Needless to say I was freaked, but the night was coming fast and there weren't any nearby alternatives. I told him I would heed his advice, but ultimately, I went anyway. No one was at the camp spot, but there were a few RVs. I thought it was odd, but was happy for some peace and quiet. I made a fire, ate some turkey out of a bag, and tried to relax, but something about the place was off. I cannot explain it, but it was kind of like the feeling of being watched, coupled with the fact that these RVs seemed recently used and had stealable belongings hanging around. Motorcycling day in and day out takes a huge toll on your body. I was tired as hell, but that uneasy feeling was keeping me up. After a few hours I decided I needed sleep or risk repercussions the next day. I let the fire die down and crawled into my tent. Just as I settled in, I heard it. A terrible guttural sound. It was unlike anything I've ever heard. An equal mix of a human scream and an animal dying. One dying scream, as it were. Just once. It felt close but also far. Chills pulsated throughout my body, instantly activating my fight or flight. I jumped out of my tent, and shined my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. I picked up a rock and slowly crept around, but once again, nothing. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink that night, but no one ever showed up. I can still hear that scream and feel those chills when I think about it. I worked at a movie theater and most often worked the closing shift. One night me and another manager were sitting in the small office. She was working on the nightly deposit and I was finishing up inventory numbers. We had a CD player that we would listen to at night with a stack of CDs sitting next to it. I stood up and changed the CD and sat back down. About a minute after, the entire stack of CDs launched itself across the room. One of the CDs hit my coworker in the back of the head. She looked around and saw me sitting there dumbfounded with the CDs scattered all around me in the office. We quickly finished up and left. A couple of days later, one of the other day shift managers calls me and asks me what we were doing the prior night. She seemed really annoyed, which was out of character for her because we were friends. I asked her what she meant and she asked me why we had dumped all of the security tapes onto the floor and left them there. I told her we hadn't touched the security tapes at all. The tapes were stored on top of the CCTV monitor on a small VHS tape shelf. The shelf hadn't been moved and only the tapes were on the floor. She also said that all of the sleeves from the tapes had been removed and thrown all over the place too. I was on night shift at the hospital and one of my rooms was on the far end of the unit right before this long hallway made of window that was never lit at night. As I was walking out towards this room I see a figure, hulking with arms and legs spread like they were about to run. Thick black denim jacket and black pants like someone had stuffed it full of something, and just a wide-brimmed black hat. I did a double take because something unsettled me, more than just the stillness of it standing in the dark in front of all those black windows. I swear to God, it didn't have a face. I legitimately dropped the fluids or tubing I was holding to the ground as I just stood there, completely frozen in horror as I just stared at this empty pale flesh. I'm almost about to scream when it starts to turn around away from my, only to realize that it's a little old lady bundled up in a jacket she's put on backwards. Her pale blonde gray hair was just puffy and enough to look like a face. I don't know what she was doing, but holy crap, I've run codes and traumas before and I've never been so scared in my life as being stared down by some puffy faceless night demon old lady. Not exactly a lonely road, but I was speeding west on I-70 through Colorado near Glenwood Canyon when I decided to slow down and enjoy the view. I notice a state patrol car in front of me a minute later when he turns on his sirens, and I think he's got me busted for speeding. Instead, he's pulling to the shoulder up ahead to help a broken down motorist. I slow down and remember looking at the motorist who is sitting in the driver's seat with their head down, thinking man, the guy is lucky to get help out here, no cell coverage, etc. I keep driving west. A few minutes later I start to notice police cars flying past me headed back east, sirens blaring, going extremely fast through a curvy canyon. One after another for like 15 minutes, ambulances, fire trucks, seems like all emergency response in the country is headed back the direction I came from. The next day I'm at a hotel in Utah and discover what happened. Turns out the broken down motorist had skipped bail, and after being confronted by the state trooper who was there to offer assistance, exited his car and began shooting the officer in his back multiple times. On a normal day, the officer would have died as they typically drive alone, but on that day he was headed to training and had a partner in the car who empties his clip and killed the motorist. Officer almost bled out on the road but survived. When I was 18, my family and I took a vacation to Hawaii. My mother wanted to do the touristy thing and do the road to Hana. Normally you can take a tour bus up it, but that wasn't good enough for her. So we rented a car. The rental companies typically forbid driving that road because of the liability issues. That didn't stop my mother. We had a normal drive up there, plenty to see. We spent all day exploring. So by the time everyone was exhausted, it was night. Now, we were a good ways away from the road down, think back dirt roads of Maui. So what do? Go down some of the closed-off local roads. This one road, in particular, was a very narrow winding road over the edge of the island. You couldn't even stop on the road to get out and pee. If you looked over the edge, it was a straight drop into the ocean. Anyhow, so we were driving in the dead of the night, slowly, and we approached this weird bend that backs up to a heavily forested area, a small waterfall, and a cliff overhang just above us. My mother wanted to take some pictures of the moon, stars, ocean because it was breathtaking with no city lights. So we pull off to the side of this road, with just enough space to let another car pass you. I, of course, get out too. It was dead silent. Then all of a sudden I hear what sounds like a crying baby. Which was weird. We were in the middle of nowhere and hadn't seen anyone for hours. So, I'm just standing there, confused, and it stops. I motion for my mother to come over and ask if she heard anything. She didn't. So we stand there for a little longer and it starts up again. Neither of us could pinpoint where it was coming from. Both of us were panicked because that's what baby crying does to most humans. We spent a good hour calling out and trying to figure out what to do. Eventually it stopped. We returned back to the hotel and never heard anything about it. I've told this one a number of times before, but one of my hobbies is snowshoeing. At one point, years ago, I decided to spend my vacation doing some backcountry backpacking. I pull up to the base camp, which is just a parking lot and some signs. The signs are all the regular stuff: emergency rescue may be unavailable, beware of avalanches, local frequency is 9,999, all that stuff. I set out, and there's no one for miles. I find a game trail and decide that's as good as anything else to follow. A couple hours later I'm in some light woods, and I see movement up ahead. As we approach each other I can tell it's a man. When we get close we call out to each other and stop to talk. Stopping to talk is basically a requirement in the backcountry. It's a nice break from the monotony of your own footsteps, and it's also about safety. You or them being able to give rescue crews a more recent last known location could be the difference between life and death. So stopping for brief chit-chat is normal. But something is off with this guy. He's older, maybe in his 50s. He's got some high-end gear, but he's so bundled up I can't make out any features. "What's your name?" he asks. "Normal enough." "Where you from?" "You alone out here?" "What brought you out here?" "Where do you work?" None of that normally would have bothered me, but when I asked him the same questions he kept his answers vague. And if I kept it vague he would push the question. It was like he was sizing me up. Our interaction ended when he took a big step towards me and reached for something on his hip. And I'll be honest, I didn't handle it super well. He freaked me out. I jumped backwards and damn near tripped on my own snowshoes. But I somehow stayed on my feet and managed to unholster my pistol. The guy just laughed and said, "Well, I better get going. Stay safe." And he just walked away. Back the direction I had just come from. I didn't waste time either. I started marching away too. I kept looking over my shoulder every couple of seconds for the next several hours. Not the best start to a 4-day solo trip into the wilderness. About 2 years ago I was hiking at a local national forest by my hometown. My family had a get-together, and been hiking there a few times, so we were kind of familiar with the area. I have geocached once there, so I was gonna try it again because it was a popular area for caching. I split off from my family and it was just me and my friend who I brought. We were both by this giant lake, and off to the right we seen a faint unmarked path. We decided to see if it led to anything cool, but about a couple hundred meters ahead we smelt a horrible smell. We looked around being curious what was causing that god-awful smell. Then my friend pointed up to a limb of a tree to a hanging deer carcass, a split right through the stomach. The deer also looked a few days old. So it hadn't been there long. There was also a cloth doll nailed into the tree. It had been worn and made things worse. I had a horrible gut feeling and looked over at my friend and said, "Bro, let's get the fuck out of here." We got out of there faster than we came. It was almost like a ritual. We agreed to not tell anyone there with us about what we found. I haven't been to the place since, but I really hope no one else had stumbled upon what we found in the woods that day. I don't really know if it qualifies as scary, but I remember getting hit from behind by something while I was stopped in the middle of an intersection in the middle of the night last year. To this day, I don't really know what it was. I even saw the traffic cam footage and saw nothing. All I saw was me being stopped completely in the middle of the road waiting for a car in front of me to pass by so I can cross, when my car shook like something had hit it from behind, and a minute or so later, it showed me parking to the side to check what had happened. The accident didn't leave any dents nor scratches, but it had enough impact to disalign my bumper. I've actively tried to avoid that road since. I had freshly turned 18 and was working a closing shift at a small cafe in a grocery store. One of my regular customers comes in, Tom. Tom was a hugger. He'd come in and call out, "Where's my girls?" And we'd all have to awkwardly hug this 80-year-old man while he whispered, "God bless you," in your ear. I hated Tom. He always held on a little too long and whispered a little too close. On this shift, I was closing alone and Tom came in at about 4 p.m. Not unusual, I dealt with the creepy and got him his coffee and bagel. He was with his wife this time. She was sweet but tired looking. He started asking me questions as I worked. What do I have to do at night? Is it hard closing alone? What time am I off? Do I ever get scared walking to my car in the dark? The questions got progressively more uncomfortable and his wife just sat there silently. I answered as friendly as I could, despite the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I would catch him staring at me often. It was okay though, I was off work at 7, so it wasn't a big deal. Until he didn't leave. His wife went home without him, and he just stayed, staring, for hours. I asked if there was anything else he needed. He said, "No, I'm just waiting for you to get off of work." He wanted to walk me to my car, he said, because young girls shouldn't be in a dark parking lot alone. I told him it wasn't necessary and continued about my work, ignoring him now even as he stared. He left about 15 minutes before my shift ended, into the dark Michigan winter, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't think twice when I punched out and headed to my car. I grabbed my snow brush and began clearing my car, enjoying the quiet that's unique to a snowy night. I began to hear the crunching of footsteps behind me. I brush it off. I am in a parking lot, after all. But they get closer, past any other car and directly towards my car, parked away from the others in employee parking. I look, and it's Tom, maybe 50 feet away and smiling. He tells me that I should have looked for him. He had been sitting outside waiting for me, and I should know it's dangerous for young girls to be alone in a parking lot at night. I began shaking. I tried to open my car door, but it was frozen shut due to the earlier storm. Tom came closer, calling me a stupid girl and asking God to forgive him. I debated running back into the store. He was so old he surely couldn't keep up, right? I didn't want to chance it, though. He could have been younger as I'm a terrible judge of age, and I'm not exactly fast myself considering my weight. So I stand my ground. I fumble in my purse for my pepper spray, thankfully attached to my keys. I tell him to stay back, I have pepper spray, and to go home to his wife. He glowers at me. I show him the teal canister. We're about 15 feet apart now, he's well within range. He calls me a bitch, spits at me, and heads back into the store. I get in my half-uncovered car and drive home, terrified. I called the store when I got home, only a mile and a half away, so about 2 minutes, and told them what had happened. They kicked Tom out and told him not to come back. He began cursing up a storm and his wife had to come pick him up. He ended up getting arrested for child pornography a couple years later, but I don't know the details as I had moved away at that point. Can't say I'm sad to see him go, though. Graveyard shift worker at the time. Won't go into details, but I stopped a guy from holding me at gunpoint and taking my vehicle while I was pumping gas. Station was closed, it was 2 a.m. Streets were pitch black. Guy comes walking up out of nowhere. Asks where I'm headed, what time it was, etc., just getting me to talk. Nothing alarming. Except he's fidgety and has had his one hand in his front leather jacket pocket the whole time. I say F it, was almost done pumping, decided if this was it I'll make the best of it, guy needs whatever it is more than I do, so I say need a ride somewhere? Was on my way home from work but I've got a few dollars, we can stop for food because I'm hungry and don't mind having company. What's your name? Mine is Mary. I know that if you start getting personal with an attacker it gets harder for them to hurt you. I was thinking take me hostage, hold me at gunpoint, yell in my face, I can take this. But please don't take my life and don't leave me 2 hours stranded away from home in the middle of the night. I got done pumping when I finished, giving him a short amount of time to think on his answer, and in his panic at me offering him the things he was going to take from me, he goes, "Nah, I'm just gonna walk, thanks again." Leaves. So this happened on my shift, graveyard. I was helping another short-staffed store across town. Had a woman come in, she seemed a little frazzled and is carrying a Bible but otherwise she seems fine. She buys some chips then starts talking to me about crazy this coronavirus stuff, yada yada, then she tells me ate a evil spirit pretending to be a clove of garlic. I of course think she's just messing with me but no, she pulls out a piece of garlic, lays it on the counter and starts telling me it isn't garlic and is in fact a demon that wanted to possess her. She then starts asking me about if I believe in spirits or if I can see it because despite looking like I'm one of the humans that's a third demon, I'm really a human who's a third angel who was sent to earth to help her expel the evil spirits and urges she feels, and that it's okay if I didn't know it because she can see it, and she leaves the garlic on the counter and tells me that she'll wait for me to deal with it. Now that's pretty much where the original incident ended. A few days later about 2 a.m. maybe 2:15-ish on a Tuesday, I'm working the graveyard shift at my usual store when this woman pops up again. She proceeds to just buy some candy and sorta hang out asking me about jade, the jewelry type, and incenses and if we've met before. Nothing as weird as before. Now the weird thing is I didn't hear or see her come in before she approached the counter. We have a loud ass siren thing that turns on when the doors are opened and only shuts off when they're closed. Which is normally not a big deal, but considering I'd been stocking and cleaning in the front the whole time and had only gotten 2 or 3 customers beforehand, yeah, it was a bit weird. She hangs out a bit longer than rushes to restroom and doesn't walk out of it till about 6. Says have a nice day and just walks out the store like nothing. Which freaks me the fuck out cause I cleaned the restrooms a little bit after she went in and she somehow had managed to slip out or hide somewhere when I went to clean them. Outside of hiding in the stalls there is nowhere to hide in the restrooms and there's no windows to slip out of. And like a jackass I looked up at the top of the stalls and at the ceiling thinking she had pulled a Spider-Man, but nope, she just poof. Disappeared then reappeared and left super casual a couple hours later. Salvadoran guy here. About a year ago, I moved to the capital city alone to study and I met some friends in the first months here. I went to the beach about 3 or 4 times before this incident. I'll give you context. I have a 2011 Corolla, which isn't a fast car and sometimes I get stranded in the street. The beach is like 20 miles away, the highway isn't in the best condition, but even with this country being as dangerous as it is, this road is really safe. Well, we packed our things and get in on the road. It was about the half of the way, 10:30 p.m., and I saw a car next to the road, may have had a flat tire. I think twice before helping, because vehicle theft is known in this way, but I helped them. I stopped and saw this bearded fat guy, about 30 or 35 years old. He is obviously drunk, and he tells me that he has a flat tire that he cannot change it by himself. He tells me his friends do not know that he left the beach, he needs to go home, and that his spare tire is in the back of the car. He accompanies me to open it and before I know it, he hits me very hard on the head, The blow pushes me towards the street and another man appears out of the bushes with a naked torso and a machete. I move around the car and quickly analyze the situation. None of my friends know that I stopped on the street, my phone is in the car, I am completely incommunicado. Both men are very drunk, but I am afraid that they could still attack me as I am completely helpless. I start walking around the car, with them watching me and trying to surround me. When I have a clear view of my car and the bearded man is on that side, I run like a cheetah towards and start it as fast as I can to shoot off down the road. I hear a shot but I have no intention of looking back. I call the police and as expected, they just tell me not to walk through the area at that time because there were similar calls that week. I didn't travel alone in that area again, but unfortunately I can't stop helping good travelers. A few years back I shared a house in the suburbs with a couple of roommates. It was a planned development, with lots of benefits like a community pool, park, garden, etc. The downside was the local bus stopped running at around 8 p.m. I worked graveyards and early shifts nearby, not an issue. But my roommate, Luke, worked a night shift that only clocked off at around 10 p.m. Then he had to ride the city bus for an hour to get 10 miles out from where the house was. I told him if he covered some of my utilities share, I'd pick him up in my car and save him the late night walk home from the city bus stop. This worked out great, and another roommate, Jen, started to join me for the ride or to go on a late night snack run. One night I was sleeping and woke up to the sound of Jen calling my name over and over, Walkie, Walkie. I get up in a daze and think, damn, I fell asleep and missed Luke's text, now we're late to pick him up. Jen's in the driveway under my window and still calling me, Walkie, Walkie. I tell her I'm coming and she stops. I'm rushing now cause I have two roommates waiting on me, so I put on a jacket, go downstairs, grab the keys, slip on my shoes and open the garage, and see nothing in the driveway except my car. I'm confused, since there's no way Jen's 170 centimeters self is hiding behind our dying rose bush or my Toyota. I think about going out to look around for her, cause maybe she walked down the street a bit to smoke a cigarette since she knows I hate the smell, but I realize I forgot my phone. I close the garage and go back inside. Jen got outside without it open, she can get back in without it. As I rush upstairs to where all our rooms are, I realize the lights are on under Jen and Luke's rooms. They're both home. I get to my room, check my phone and see that it's 2 a.m. on a Sunday. Luke doesn't work Sundays and Jen was never outside calling my name. I drive about 40 minutes out into the country every Saturday for band practice and am usually headed home about 1 to 2 a.m. The place we get together is not super remote, but it is all woods and farmland, and the road is basically empty that late at night. One night, I saw a set of luminous eyes right on the tree line on the opposite side of the road. I figured it was probably a deer because I see a handful of them every time I make the drive. Anyway, as soon as I saw the eyes, I started slowing down because deer are absolute idiots and will jump right into the path of your car with no warning, even if they see you coming from a long way off. As I was getting ready to pass by, I swear it looked like whatever it was stood up on its hind legs and ran into the woods. It moved quick too, like a horizontal sprint, not like big vertical hops like deer do. It took me a really long time to reconcile what I'd seen. I kept telling myself, nah dude. You were just tired. It was just a deer. But I've seen hundreds of deer and this thing was too tall. And it was too skinny to be a bear. And it moved too fast to be a person, not to mention the eyes. I still have trouble wrapping my head around what that might have been. I have a perfect story for this. I live near the chimney of PA and went to college south of Pittsburgh, almost in West Virginia. The first time I drove by myself back to school I had a GPS that my dad had set to no freeways because he didn't want me driving on freeways. So I'm into the boondocks of PA, dirt roads, no signs, trees on trees. If I rolled down the window I'm sure I would have heard some banjo music. I was out there. I end up on a paved road on the middle of the forest and suddenly entered a little town. The only people I saw were two guys that had apparently just finished digging a large hole. That was actually the first thing I saw as I went into this town. Not a great start. I noticed the street signs were French names and I thought it was interesting. Not too weird considering I was in what probably used to be French-Canadian fur trapping territory. There's a lot of French names in southwestern PA. Then I passed a beer distributor that had a banner out front that was in French. That's when I started panicking. I passed a gas station and the prices were about what they were at home and in my school's town and I knew I was going south, so it's not like I somehow ended up in Canada. Then pretty much as I got to my peak point of panic the town just ended. It didn't peter out like most towns do. Probably after 15 minutes of wondering what the fuck kind of town I just passed through, the road I was on turned to a brick road, and in another few minutes I was in Pittsburgh. The trip usually took me a little under 4 hours if I stopped along the way to get food or gas. It took me almost 6 with no stops for that trip. Changed my GPS settings real quick after that. This is gonna sound like bullshit, but I promise I'm not making this up. Last summer, I was driving home late at night from a sporting event and my parents were a few minutes behind me. It was around midnight, and I was diving through my neighborhood, so there weren't any cars out. It's quiet enough during the day, so it's really dead at night. All of the following happened in a matter of seconds, so please don't judge me for panicking. I was going around a small curve and a huge creature ran out into the road right at the side of my car. I swear, this thing was as big as my car. I screamed and swerved into the left lane to avoid it. I braked so I didn't hit the car parked on the left side of the road, and my brake lights lit the thing up behind me. I only saw it for a second in my rearview mirror. It looked like a giant black humanoid dog, and my tail lights caught its eyes so they lit up red. It looked like it was straight out of a horror movie. Braking was a mistake, because it started fucking chasing my car. I screamed again, and I gunned it, and rolled through the next stop sign because I wanted to get out of there. I grabbed my bag and my shoes and I debated if I should wait for my parents in my car, or if I should make a run for the back door. But then, I thought, what if it finds my car, and gets me through the windows? I could visualize it jumping out from the gap between our garage and the neighbor's house, and my stomach dropped. But what if it gets me on the way to the door? I decided to just make a run for it, and I'd throw my bag at it if I had to buy time. Obviously, I made it. My parents laughed at me when they got home. I don't believe in supernatural shit, but I have no idea what the hell that was. I was on a backcountry hiking trip with a couple of friends. We'd been hiking for about 4 days and had spent the past day completely off trail. We were miles and miles from somewhere any casual person would be camping, and we hadn't seen a soul since we left the parking lot. Anyway, I wake up in the middle of the night to find my friend who I'm sharing a tent with just staring at me. I'm a bit creeped out, but assume that I've woken up because of him staring at me, but then from outside our tent I hear a woman singing and realize that's what woke me up. This is completely impossible. She sounds close-ish and we definitely would have clocked someone camping that close by. It's clearly a woman's voice and I'm the only woman on our trip, so it definitely couldn't be anyone from our group, and I've heard mountain lions that sometimes sound a bit like people, but they sound like a woman screaming, not singing. It was pretty windy that night, and it being the wind is the only slightly plausible explanation for what we heard, but again it sounded so clearly like a human woman singing that I just can't totally convince myself it was only the wind. My friend sits up like he's going to get out of our tent and check what's up, but I just get this horrible wash of dread come over me, this feeling that if I let him leave the tent he won't come back. I'm not afraid of the woods in any way. I've spent a lot of my life backcountry hiking and have had several run-ins with wildlife/weathered bad storms with not ideal equipment, and never have I ever felt one tiny fraction of the fear I felt that night. We stayed up until dawn, just huddled in our tent together freaking out. The singing lasted about an hour and then just stopped, and we didn't hear anything weird for the rest of the night. The next morning we checked around camp and there was no sign that anyone had camped close to us, and our other friends had slept through the night and didn't hear anything weird. The rest of our trip was totally normal, but I'll never forget that night. I have no explanation for it and have never known anyone who experienced anything similar. I lived in a rural mountain town to be closer to my outdoor hobbies, climbing, backpacking, skiing. It snowed nearly every night and was peaceful and quiet. I loved it. It's the kind of place where people are friendly, but the kind of place where people really kept to themselves. The plot of land I loved on was approximately 5 acres and I closer to town but still several miles out. I had a few neighbors that were nice enough, but no one ever stopped by for anything, ever. One morning while backing out of my driveway I noticed in the fresh morning powder there were deep footprints. So I, like a fool, get out and follow them. They went all the way around my house, and was clear that they had stopped at each window. I followed the footprints down my half-mile driveway to where they stopped at a set of tires tracks. Still have no idea what the fuck that was about, but I moved less than a year later. Something about someone going to that length to peep in my windows really shakes me to my core. So I went outside for walks at night sometimes. It's not the best habit, but I figured it was alright to do that again because I moved to a gated complex. But I was wrong. One day I went back from a walk and found a stranger in the fountain/garden circle, and he was looking at me as I got closer. I won't say I know everyone in the neighborhood, but I know a lot of people and their families because I'm part of the Women's Association, and yet I never even saw this guy. He could be a guest, sure, but he struck me as odd even from a distance. He was just standing still in the fountain in the middle of the night, so that's odd enough, but he also looked unstable to me. His eyes were red, he looked like he hadn't showered for a while, and his clothes were full of stains. Did one of the neighbors go through a rough patch or something, I thought, but I haven't heard anything like that. I decided to walk the long way around. We kept our eyes on each other, then out of nowhere he started screaming. I couldn't tell what he was saying, but it sounded horrible. He was really angry, or sad, or whatever intense emotion it was. So I bolted, and he ran after me. He stopped screaming as he was chasing me, instead he got out a knife. I honestly thought I'd die if he caught me. I ran the fastest I had ever run in my life, but I didn't run straight home. I didn't want him knowing where exactly I live. So I jumped over fences trespassing into other people's properties, which was a horrible decision in hindsight, but I didn't think that far at the time. Got home and hid in my second story, up all night. I belatedly realized I might have invited disaster upon my neighbors, but I didn't have the guts to get out again. In the morning I immediately went to look for the security to find out what the shit had happened last night. Security said there had been complaints about some ruckus and asked me about it. Yeah, that was probably me. But they didn't find any guy when they investigated last night, though apparently some people did see someone running. But probably me, not the guy I described. They looked for him for some time, did night patrols, but nothing. To this day I still have no idea who that was and what was up with him, and I stopped going for night walks. There's a tunnel called the Sensabaugh Tunnel in Tennessee. It's not a very long tunnel, like you can see the other end of the tunnel during the day, but at night, some people say it turns into a dark portal for the paranormal or the demonic, especially on a full moon. The entryway of the tunnel is completely graffitied out due to it being abandoned. Graffiti words like portal to hell and Satan's bunghole are all the typical graffiti you'd normally see in places like downtown Detroit that covers the tunnel inside and out. However, what really makes it stand out is all the paranormal activity that's been reported from it. Apparently that tunnel has a bad history of crime and murders that it has been used for. Everything from screams, ghosts, noises, including laughter of little kids, can all be heard emanating from darkness of the tunnel. The darkness at night is completely black, much darker than the surrounding dark of night, much like walking straight into a black hole. The stories of this place keep getting weirder. One famous story was one I heard a while back. Some guy decided to go drive himself to the tunnel and wanted to keep it parked in there on a full moon, with the car covered in baby powder. All he had with him was a voice recorder and a gun when he pulled up and turned on his blighters and then slowly drove into the tunnel, then turned off the vehicle completely once inside. What he said I'll always remember. While he was parked in the tunnel, it had a coldness that wasn't normal for the humidity of the summer, despite it being in a solid concrete tunnel. He then turned on his voice recorder with his gun in hand with the engine completely off. He sat and listened for what seemed like a few minutes. He said he could hear the drippy drop noises from water, and what sounded like small voices that were faint and could barely make them out. What startled him was when he felt and heard something brush up against the side of the passenger door in the midst of complete darkness. He jumped so badly he dropped the recorder to the floorboard and rushed to turn back on the car. It didn't start. He kept turning the ignition key and nothing. Battery acted like it was completely dead. He now started to panic and grabbed his phone for light. He looked at it and he apparently forgot to charge it, so it had a little less than half a charge on it with a dead signal, though good enough for a light source. He turned on the light from his phone and he could see his breath in the car as he began to breath heavy. He kept desperately trying to get his car to start while making sure his doors were locked. He said he just sat there with the gun in his hand for what felt like hours, panicking, watching the light from his phone slowly die. He knew he was going to have to get out of this car and look under the hood or run like hell. He had to do it quick cause his battery life was almost dead along with his only light source. He said he felt like just leaving the car in there and running for his life. He knew the tunnel wasn't that long. If he was fast he could make it. He decided to turn off the light to think about it some more, with his breath and the drops of water falling from the tunnel being the only thing he could hear. He then held his breath to listen, and to make sure no one else was outside. He swore he heard faint laughter like giggles, with his gut screaming at him to stay in the car. He turned the key one last time with a prayer and it turned on with a loud vroom. He put the car in reverse and floored it till he was out. He said he was hitting the steering wheel and shouting in victory while he got the hell out of there. Once he was at a safe enough distance, he finally got out of the car, but what he found made him shit a brick. The baby powder that covered his car was now full of tiny, small handprints from front to back. An old job I had was located on an industrial estate in the middle of an expansive, abandoned and disused airfield. One of those places that even when the sun shone, if the estate was quiet, it was eerie. It was a small business, and because of the nature of the work, the main bulk got done in the morning, leaving the afternoons quiet and therefore only manned by 1 or 2 members of staff. On this particular day, it was just me as my colleague was out at a meeting. It was a sunshiny, normal day and I'd been in the midst of doing very little, as you do when left to your own devices in a quiet office, when I decided to take a break to pee. Now, because of the weird layout of the building, to get to the toilets you went downstairs, took a right at a crossroads, the front door on your left, through the, at that point, empty warehouse, and followed the loop, leaving you directly under the main office. So there I am, having a grandiose wee when I hear the front door open and close. At this point, I'm not fussed. My colleague is due back in, so it's most likely them, and if it's not, it'll be one of the drivers anyway who quite often pop in and out. As I finish up and flush the toilet, I peer out the small window behind the loo to scout our section of the car park and just see who's arrived. Only, there's no cars bar mine. That's kinda odd, and I'm a little unsettled, but I shake the feeling off by figuring it's a nice day, could just be a driver has walked round. As I move to the sink and start washing my hands, the floorboards above my head start making the very familiar creaks and groans of somebody ascending up the stairs, and I can tell exactly where they are by the sound of which stair they're putting weight on, so somebody's definitely in and heading to the office. For some reason, the weird unsettling feeling of earlier starts coming back over me, so I finish up doubly quick time and come out of the toilets, just as the main floorboard of the office creaks. I'm calling out all the time as I take the loop back around, and through the warehouse. As I reach the bottom of the stairs, there's nobody on them, and as I say, all the time I've been walking I've been calling out, figuring whoever it is would most likely stop and hang back to wait for me. But there's nobody. Now really creeped out, at the foot of the stairs I call out again, just in case they haven't heard, expecting somebody to poke their head around the main office door. Nobody does. There's just silence. By this point, I'm petrified. I'm on my own, in the middle of nowhere, and somebody has decided to play peekaboo in this building. With my heartbeat pounding in my ears, I take the first few steps. Alongside the stairs, there's a downstairs office and a small window that allows you to peek into the room. I check that. There's nobody in there. I carry on up, now fully on guard. At the top of the stairs there's another crossroads, main office on the right, conference room, with shut door, on the left. I reach the landing of the stairs, fully tensed, with my keys in between my closed fist. I turn the corner. There's nobody there. The office is empty. But I have 100% heard somebody come in and up the stairs. The door is so heavy that the sound of it opening or closing is unmistakable, plus the same for the floorboards, which always give away someone's movements. All the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The only place somebody could be is directly behind me, in the closed door conference room, and there's no way I'm opening that. The room is massive and pitch black. I leg it downstairs just as my colleague pulls into the car park. I explain the whole thing to him, and together we brave the conference room. He pushes the door open, I hit the lights. Nobody. We scour the warehouse, even though there's no way that somebody could have got out, the shutter doors are down and locked. We check every room, everywhere. Nobody. To this day it's the creepiest thing that I ever experienced in the building. I know what I heard. There was no way it could have been wind, or heating, because the floorboards make specific noises when people are on them. I'd know, I'd heard them enough times. There was no way that anybody could have gone past me, whether in the warehouse or not, as the corridor is so small I would have seen them, or heard the door click again when they left. I've got no explanation, all I know is what I heard.